claimed that public transportation is for jerks and lesbians. Not everyone is quite as blunt as Homer Simpson, but my research participants over the last 10 months or so have been educating me in all sorts of social meanings that are connected to transport in Christchurch, New Zealand. And when I talk about social meanings, I'm talking about things that connect particular kinds of transport to particular kinds of people or particular human characteristics. So my participants have told me that rebels ride motorbikes, fitness freaks ride road bicycles, and nanas drive cars that they describe as shopping trolleys. I think one of the really interesting things about this from a consumption perspective is that it is often the conspicuous consumption of material goods, usually a vehicle or a type of clothing, that connects an individual person to a social expectation of who that person is or how they're going to behave. What I want to do today is talk, though, about the thing that I'm most interested in this respect, and that's whether these social meanings actually have an influence on the way that people travel in their everyday lives. And I want to talk about three themes that I've identified in my emerging results so far. Before I do that, I just want to say that today I'm not going to talk about any of the background literature, the theory, or the methods. But if anybody wants to know about that stuff, then I'm happy to answer questions about it. But I want to use these precious 10 minutes to talk about some of the emerging results. The things that I want to talk about then, I want to talk about participants' awareness of social meanings and of the importance of those social meanings. I want to talk about the impacts of social meanings on how people travel. And I want to talk about how participants manage social meanings and try to manage social meanings through their everyday practices. On the participant awareness then, it is abundantly clear from the data that I've collected that participants are very aware of the social meanings that they might be connected to through their use of transport. I've got two examples that I want to show you that are slightly different in this respect. The first one comes from Anna, who is a university student in her early 20s, and she says, sometimes it feels weird driving and parking in the uni car park in that car because I feel like other people look at me and think that I'm meant to be a student who has no money. I shouldn't have a car like that. So she's aware that people are looking at her and her car and making some connections about her social status. And in a very different social situation, but making a very similar observation, we have Dina, who is a professional in her early 40s. And Dina says, we went to a local restaurant, we literally parked the Audi right outside. We walked in there and we looked at the incredibly cool people and we went, man, we feel so uncool. But we're handing over the gold card and we've got an Audi, so it's okay. And in these quotes, both Anna and Dina are aware that the particular vehicle that they're driving can cause people to reflect on them and their social status. And I think one of the particularly interesting things here is that cars are often seen as symbols of status and success. And Dina's comment certainly reflects that. But Anna, and particularly some of the other younger participants in the study, talked about the way in which if your car doesn't match other elements of your social status, that can cause problems. And particularly for the students and the younger people, if you had too flash a car, it was assumed that your parents had bought the car for you. And that says something negative about your maturity and your independence. And I think that comes back to some of the things that Juliana was saying about having had to earn these symbols of status. If you haven't, then it looks bad. Dina went on to say, and we're going on to the importance of social meanings, Dina went on to say that she doesn't think that her and her partner would have been treated any differently in that restaurant were it not for the Audi and the gold card. But she doesn't always feel that way, and she went on to tell me that when her and her fiancé have been out looking at wedding venues, they've often taken their other cheaper car for fear that if people see them as being wealthy, they'll get ripped off. And Dina's not alone in thinking that the messages that are conveyed by her transport actually have implications for the way that people treat her and for her life more generally. And Stephen M. says, my wife works for an architect's firm, and people who are focused on design and things like that are sort of judged on appearance more. I worry that, maybe she should update the car because it causes problems at work or, seems a liability or something for her we see here is that, as I say, the vast majority of the participants were aware of the social meanings to which they were connected, and some of them did talk about some of these implications or repercussions of social meanings in terms of their daily lives. So it would be reasonable to expect then that when people make choices about transport, that these social meanings have an impact on those choices. And that's certainly the case when it comes to vehicle choice. And I've got lots of examples of people talking about the social meanings that they took into consideration when they purchased a vehicle. What I think is actually more interesting here is looking at the impact of social meanings on transport mode choice. So that's whether people drive or take a bus or ride a bike and so on. And I think it's more interesting because the traditional logics of transport geography and other related disciplines will tell us that people choose mode choice according to practical considerations like time and cost and convenience. And this research suggests that social meanings have a role to play in those decisions as well. For example, Chris rejects the idea of riding a motorbike to go and see clients because he says if they were motorsport clients then that would be all right, but it's not a good professional look, I suppose. And Chris is quite a keen motorbiker, but he said he would not ride his motorbike to go and see clients. And Sunny, who also rides a motorbike and rides a push bike, said she wouldn't ride either to go and see clients for this same reason. So what we see, and in fact I have a quote from Sunny later that we're going to look at about managing social meanings, but what we see building up here is a picture of social meanings encouraging people to drive cars and encouraging people to pay attention to the different vehicles that they choose to drive so that they can manage the messages that go out to the people around them about who they are and how they're likely to behave. So that brings me on to my next theme, which is managing those social meanings and how participants try to manage their connection with the different meanings that are around transport. And particularly, I want to talk here about participants who try to be inconspicuous in their use of transport so that they can avoid connection to negative social meanings. So Brendan is a keen cyclist, but he says if he rode his bike to a shop, which he probably wouldn't do anyway, but if he did, he would be very careful to take his helmet and all his high-vis gear and stuff off before he went into the shop to avoid being judged and treated differently, and in his words, being seen as one of those cycling weirdos. And similarly, Sunny, who said that she wouldn't ride her motorbike or her bike to go and see clients, she also had an issue about her previous car. And she said, I know that I had a bit of a, complex about my previous car. When I would go to see a client, I would park around the corner because I thought they would judge me by what car I was driving. And this actually came up in a discussion where Sunny was talking about having just bought a new car, primarily because she wanted a car that she was comfortable driving in a business sense and that didn't reflect badly on her own business. And she spent quite a lot of time talking about the way that she felt that her car was sometimes the only judgment that people had of how successful her business was. So it was really important for her to have a car that made her business look successful and professional, but not so much so that she was seen as being frivolous or excessive. In summary then, what I've talked about today, I've talked about how my participants have an awareness of social meanings, and most of the participants do, and a lot did also talk about that importance of social meanings. And I've talked a little bit about the impact of those social meanings on travel mode choices, so on whether you take a bus or a car or a bike or whatever. And also, I've hinted about the vehicle choices, but haven't really gone into that in any great detail. I can if anybody's interested. And finally, I've talked a little bit about how participants try to manage their connections to negative social meanings through trying to remain inconspicuous through their consumption of different material goods. People differ. They do vary. And I want to finish by saying that a lot of my participants did also talk about social meanings that they said had absolutely no impact at all on their travel practices. So I think there is a lot more nuance to this than I've been able to convey in these last 10 minutes. But hopefully I've piqued your interest and you'll ask me lots of questions about it later so that we can get into some of those nuances in a bit more detail. But I want to finish with a challenge to you guys. Over the next 2 days of the conference, if you've got a few spare seconds, I want you to have a think about your own transport and what meanings your own transport might connect you to. And then I want you to come and find me, seek me out, come and find me, and tell me what you think. Because as people with an interest or an expertise in consumption, I would be really interested to hear about how you find these issues around your own transport. Are you a rebel, a nana, a fitness freak, or something else entirely? I would love to hear about that.